All right. Well, I'll get us started. Um, Hello and welcome. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being in here in whatever time zone you are zooming in on. My name is Rebecca Jez, and I am honored to be the president of the Division for International Special Education and Services. We are really excited about today's event, which is part two of this global perspective on the book. And we are talking about learning about inclusive education in the global context, and we are asking for voices from the field. So thank you very much for being here. Next slide.
Okay. Why it did not work? Okay, good.
Oh, there we go. So I am here to welcome you to this event where I'm going to tell you a little bit about DISES. We'll do some panel introductions, and then we will we'll have the panelists talk about education in the different contexts. We'll have a Q&A and possibly breakout rooms depending on how big we are. And then we will share some resources with you and give you some announcements about what's next. Next slide. So the Division for International Special Education and Services is part of the Council for Exceptional Children. And we are really here to promote knowledge exchange, collaboration, human rights, and advocacy for those around the world who provide services for individuals with disabilities. A huge aim of our work is to share information, but also bring people together. And that is one of the impetus of this global or this virtual event series that we started in 2020. And we are excited to have continue to go on to today. Next slide. All right, and I will hand it over to Danny and Deke, who have been planning this series for quite some time.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Dr. Danielle Lane. Danny, I'm at Western Oregon University, where I'm assistant professor in special education. I am also recently brought on as the virtual events co-chair with Dake for DISES, which we are super excited about. As Rebecca mentioned, this is the second part in a two-part series focused on voices coming from the field. I have had the privilege to work with each of our panelists across the last 2 years, bringing together the current research and the current updates on Agenda 2030 as we just hit our halfway point in that initiative coming out of UNESCO. So for today, we are going to focus on looking at inclusive education as a global movement aimed at ensuring that all children, regardless of their abilities or disabilities, have the right to be educated together in the same school and classrooms. This approach is not only providing equal access to education, but also transforming school communities and systems to accommodate the diverse needs of all students, which again is the underlying theme in the current Agenda 2030 initiative. Analysis into the effectiveness of national and international approaches to implementation, challenges to what events this inclusive approach is appropriate in terms of support provided to children with special education needs. We are extremely fortunate that we are going to hear the voices of Philippa Gordon, who is coming to us from England today, Morai, who is currently a doctoral student in Hiroshima, but originally comes from and is speaking on the country of Lesotho, and Zun Wai Oo from Myanmar, who will also be highlighting challenges in the context of the recent coup, as well as relation, again, to inclusive education. If we can go ahead and move to that next slide. So the first person I'd like to take a moment to introduce a little bit more formally is Zun Wai. As I mentioned, she is actively in Hiroshima, Japan as a doctoral student. She is again sharing her insights from Myanmar. Zun Wai, I would like to go ahead and open the floor for you to introduce yourself a little bit more thoroughly.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And uh, very early very early morning in here in Japan, and maybe I think maybe we have time differences. Yeah. And first of all, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to can I say deliver like our not like fully knowledge, but that's something that we can show to others about our contest about Myanmar or something. Where I'm very honored to be here and like collaborate with you guys. So actually, like now I'm here, as Danny said, I'm here as a doctoral student in Hiroshima University, and also like basically I used to be a assistant lecturer at the Saga University of Education in Myanmar before I came here. So maybe I also have some experience working as a senior high school teacher before I joined to University of Education. So those are some of my background. So I think maybe like first of my master degree is not about inclusive or special needs education. It was like educational management. But like some of my experience, like from my high school teacher, so it's like forced me to like how can I say to study more about the inclusive education. So maybe I will continue more about in our like contest why those experience force me to go thoroughly into the inclusive and special needs education. So actually, yeah, that's all about myself here, and thank you so much. Yeah,
Thank you
Thank
for
you, Zun Wai.
thank
And
you.
next we have another author of the book, and she is also from Japan. And would you introduce yourself, Mari?
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Morai Mamotjoka Joyce. I am from Lesotho. Lesotho is surrounded by South Africa, and I'm currently a doctoral student in special needs education. My background is the teacher of deaf and hard of hearing students in Lesotho. That is where my main research now that is based on finding the strategies that teachers in schools for the deaf, including inclusive schools, can use to teach deaf students literacy skills, specifically focusing on writing skills. So it's a great pleasure to be here. And like as Zun Wei said, it is midnight in Japan, but we are excited to be here, and we are excited also to see our lab mates, some of our lab mates also joining us. So yes, that is all. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mari. And so we are going to have introduced our third panelist today, who is also a special educator and also one of the authors of the International Inclusive Education book. And her name is Philippa. Is my pronunciation correct?
Yes, that's right. Thank you. Yes, Philippa Gordon-Gould. Hello, and it's great to meet everybody. It's so interesting. My book on inclusive education with Gary Hornby focused very much on not just how provision was made in our country, but had a look at what was going on around the world. But I have to make a confession now, and that it did focus by and large on the Western world. And we made a very difficult decision to restrict ourselves to that aspect because we thought it was going to just increase our research just a bit too widely for the book to include Eastern neighbours as well. And so for me, this is a really fascinating opportunity to learn more about what goes on further east. And I know that we have an awful lot to learn, especially from Japan, actually, because, well, in terms of educational success, you know, you're a league streets ahead of us. And the only thing I would say is that in terms of making progress with our legislation, we were probably one of the earliest countries to get on board with that. And we've learnt a lot of what the downfalls are as well as the positives. So I'm looking forward to talking about those and sharing them with you. My background is that I started in the teaching profession quite late. as a mature student, having been a parent of a couple of children with special needs, I was very determined to get involved with education so that I could look at it from the inside and try and see how things could be improved and understand how it worked. So I very much started it with a research hat on. So yeah, that's me.
Great. Thank you so much. So Danny, shall we move forward to the panel discussions?
I believe we are. So I know you have all started to give a little bit of your personal background, but for at least two of our authors, and Philippa, you have also mentioned that you focused on part of your country. If you could give us some context, thinking about the context of the chapter that you presented. So Philippa, for you, you're going to be looking at England, and then Morai and Zun Wai, Lesotho, and Myanmar. Can you give us a little bit of the context of where and when you were writing this, and what does inclusion mean in that given context? Morai, do you mind getting us started on this big question that could take up the entire the entire session? We'll just give you a really big question to get started.
Thank you so much. It's it's a very difficult question, like you said, but I'll just continue from my context. As I'll start with my experience as a deaf school teacher, well, which is what made me write the two chapters. The first one on inclusive education in Lesotho and the current challenges on implementing it, like in the classrooms with teachers. So now about the current one, and also talking about Lesotho, we have challenges, and we also have successes regarding inclusive education. We also have some laws, and we have the policies that talk about including students with disabilities and how they should be taught in the classrooms, even though we have the limited training of teachers who teach the students either in special schools or inclusive schools. So these papers, especially my agenda, the paper on Agenda 2030, focuses also on inclusive education policy of Lesotho. So currently in the schools, we have the Lesotho system is like divided into mostly segregation, the way I would describe it, because we have a lot of special schools for students studying from the primary level. And then when they go to the high school level, we take them to inclusive schools, which are mostly now practically practicing integration. So these chapters are talking about what happens when our students get into schools in Lesotho. Because currently also I'm talking about the current research that is done in Lesotho that shows that although the students are said to be going to schools, whether they have their students who are there for hard of hearing, or they have other types of disabilities, or there are students also from minority languages in Lesotho who also are shown to be performing less in examinations because they speak different languages from what is taught in the schools. So I incorporate all the students. I don't only focus on deaf students in this context. So now when I talk about inclusion, then in this context in Lesotho, overall, it means accommodating every student in the school, and then it puts the responsibility also on us as teachers to make sure that those students get educated. And then when we are there, I remember, like, I'll go back to my experience when I started off as a teacher, and then I arrived in a deaf school. I couldn't even communicate with my students, but I was from the training, the undergrad training in special education. So it was very challenging to get there and to try to communicate with the students. So usually, I would ask even other teachers, like, how do we teach these students? And then they'll be like, no, just continue, you practice with time, try to teach them, try to see, maybe teach them the alphabet first. So those are the things, but I never really got to have like the concrete or whatever, something that I can use, that I can understand, because if I teach them today, tomorrow they forget. And then I'm like, oh my God, these students have forgotten what I've taught. So what do we do? And then I realized also that even when they go, like a lot of them would drop out from primary schools. And then if they manage to the high school, and then they come back to the primary school to seek jobs. And then because they're saying, oh, there's nobody who wants to work with us, or probably, obviously, they do not succeed to pass because of the limited writing or reading skills. So then this challenge, and many others that also talk about other students in Lesotho who do not access education, like because of the languages that are used. I feel like right now I'm talking about so many ideas in one time, but yeah, so one thing, I'll try to fix them later, but one thing also when we talk about Lesotho, we speak Sesotho and we speak English and other languages like Zulu, and other like Xhosa, but those languages, the other languages are not included in the education system. So it means Sesotho and English are official languages. So my book chapter on Agenda 2030 also talks about those students. The pass rate for them is very low. And every time there's research now in Lesotho saying they come to school, they are taught in Sesotho, no teachers are trained in their languages. And when they get to school, they have to learn Sesotho, and then they have to write English, because in Lesotho, if you can't pass English, you don't succeed in school. The examinations are conducted in English. So it's a very challenging for them like that. And specifically also for our deaf students, they also come from those communities where the Xhosa or Sesotho is not spoken. When they get to school, they come to school with no sign language. So when I used to work as the kindergarten teacher, they will come to school, no sign language, nothing, and me also, no sign language. So I'll just be there with them, and then we point, we use signs like that, and then I had to also be trained from my school with the sign language. We used to have programs like that. So when I talk about inclusive education also in this context and in this book chapter, I'm also trying to show that it is very important we may not have one conclusion to say this is inclusion or this is how it should be, but I'm trying to say we have research in Lesotho that is written by teachers in Lesotho or people who are working in the higher institutions in Lesotho that show the challenges that are there in Lesotho, showing that these students with disabilities do not make it to higher education. And then they make recommendations that teachers need to be trained, or we also need support to accommodate these students in our schools. But then also, even if we want to accommodate them, if they don't come or they never come, so my book chapter also says, so where do they go? Where do they go? Because even the statistics, we don't have it. We don't know how many of them pass. It's only us teachers who know that there will be 15 in my class, but none of them will make it out of the primary school. So, and we also want to talk about what are the challenges that are actually there. Because even if we have the inclusive education policy, what is it really trying to address? Because the inclusive education policy of Lesotho was made like it came into action in 2018. And then, but even today, it's so challenging to know where we start from. Because if we start from and then we say putting students together, but how do we move from the special schools and then suddenly we make that big step into inclusive schools? So that is what I'm trying to show here, that it is very important we make the policy, but then we also try to see like what is the challenge now that we need to address. If students cannot move from special schools, but and then so what should we address? What is the challenge? Do teachers have skills to teach them? Because now if they cannot write, but they are assessed with writing, they cannot write, but they have cell phones. There was COVID-19. During COVID-19, I'm also showing in this book chapter that we did not have any contact with them, our students, because of the internet was not working for us. Even if we were provided with things, nobody could write. Their parents, their grandparents, they could not write. So the challenges like that. So that is what I mean by inclusion. Everybody, my students with disabilities, students from language backgrounds, and also students who are head boys in Lesotho. So that is what I encompass in this chapter. Thank you so much. That's a lot. Thank you.
So it sounds like in Lesotho, we are seeing some intentionality in the policy that's being put forth. There is a clear mission and desire to work towards inclusive education, but you're still in that space of conceptualizing what is inclusive education and really also conceptualizing just how to get students into the door. And then, of course, with the pandemic, that's made everything that much more difficult. So that definitely gives us a very clear picture of where you are at in the transition in Lesotho. Zun, can you jump in and give us some of the perspective from Myanmar?
Yeah, thank you. And also like I'm gonna like how can I say point out something that Morai said. Yeah, of course we have different meanings in different contexts. Like maybe like actually like in my country, like I try to pick up like three example. Like obviously for sure when we are talking about inclusive education, the first thing that come to our mind is disability. Yeah, of course, it's a very like how can I say like what I can what should I say like a part of the important like thing that we have to focus about the inclusive education. So this is one thing about, and also apart from that disability. So and also like what Morai said, even in my country, we have officially 135 ethnic groups. So we have more than 100 language, spoken language. So just uh that is like even before the coup. Now in my country there is a like it's a very famous issue about the coup and so many like thing happened there. So even before the coup, we have like the difficulties in some other areas, like to include those uh students who speak like who that their mother tongue is not Burmese. So basically, the teacher they only speak Burmese, and like the student they don't understand Burmese. At that time, we are trying to make some progress. How can we promote and like something like what kind of action that we need to take, like recruiting some teacher from their native speaker and maybe collaborating with this. So we have such a kind of program. So I mean, like this is before the coup. So this area is also kind of um, inclusive education. So and also like now maybe almost like 3 years since 2021, like that what I mentioned in my book chapter, the coup and also the pandemic. So they cripple like all the things development across like every like many sector, not even in education, not even in inclusive education, like in every sector. Actually, like that's why I just mentioned that it's interfere with the Myanmar progress toward inclusive education. So I couldn't share like so many progress about like that 2025 agenda for the inclusive education, but I mentioned so many like how can I say challenges and also like what they are doing. What they are doing mean like is now the political situation like is kind of complicated. We have the military government, and also at the same time, the we call it the National Union NUG government is also running like a kind of share or parallel, whatever like we said. So, sorry, those education center. So both side running. So I just compare both sides. So it's very difficult to how can I say discard from the point of the researcher, like trying to discuss both side, opposite side of the military and also the NUG side is very difficult for me, like to conclude and to make suggestion and to raise price something like this. So it was one of my difficulty when I wrote that book chapter. So it's like being a researcher is not that easy when you are trying to make some point. So I have to make balance, not follow my personal like feeling or something like this. So actually not it's not like okay, so let me go back about that how can I say definition of inclusive education. My point is so based on this like how can I say that what Danny said in our email, like socio-political like context. So we have to think something about those students who are in that conflict affected area. Now they stop schooling and also they are in not refugee camp. We used to say internally displaced, like IDP camp. So actually at that there some are teachers, some are volunteer, some are like the teacher before the coup. So they are trying to make, how can I say, continuing those student education. So this is also part of inclusive education. So in, like, how can I say, in a nutshell, like something like inclusive, when you are talking about the inclusive definition of inclusive education, you may see so many different definition from UN or something like this, but like in maybe you can make a general definition of like including and like giving all the like equal right to all children, to all children. So like it's not that easy. Now, like I forgot to say, like now my research is like including children with intellectual disability in general education. Actually, in my research, I couldn't say inclusive education. So when you look thoroughly in my country context, I couldn't say inclusive education. So because like only giving the place to study there, it's not inclusive education. That's what is happening there. So I just like, okay, including student with something disability or student with intellectual disability. That's what I'm like focusing on. It's like in general education. So when I'm just like, how can I say, focusing and deep down there. So even within the disability context, so physical disability and also like something neurodevelopmental that we are focusing on. So we need different support and we need different contexts like to support them and also teach. We need to equip teacher with different knowledge about their disability, something. So my point is like, obviously, for sure, we can make a very general, like umbrella term of the definition of inclusive education. But when we go down, like one by one, like based on their gender, race, language, because like I think one of my love mate, I think maybe brother he is also there. He is from Senegal. Like when we discuss about the inclusive education in their country, it's like based on the gender base. So everything is like different. So we have different meanings in different contexts. So basically, we are trying to give the quality education to all children, like, and also try to get like the quality education for all. Yeah. So that's my point of view.
Thank you. So it sounds like in Myanmar, we again have that intentionality. We want inclusion for all, but it's very difficult to realize what that actually means, whether we're talking about the lens of COVID, of
Exactly.
135 languages, multiple governments. And when you start
Yeah,
combining those factors, it makes it that much more difficult. So in
exactly.
action, there's not a whole lot of guidance as to what's supposed to be happening and what's best for children because of all of those conflicting components. And I see Mariah shaking her head. Yes, that applies here. Philippa, can I hand it over to you for the same question?
Yes, I feel this is such a huge question, I want to try and be brief and concise because I know there's a lot to take on board. Okay, in England, we've had legislation building up over a number of decades now. So that came to a head in 2015, well, 2014, when we had the Children and Families Act that was brought in, and it essentially coordinated educational services with social care and health care. And this was very important because we recognized that all those services needed to come together if we were going to support children effectively within the school system. And a specific plan now called an educational health and care plan was devised as a standard for schools to apply for the support and funding that they needed for the individual children who presented with those needs. So the difficulty has been in implementing those expectations, and to a large extent, they have fallen down, particularly during economic hard times. So in 2008, when there was the sort of world economic crash, that had a huge impact on how we were able to implement the legislation that had been introduced. And it meant that our schools were deprived of a lot of the resources and the staffing that we needed in order to make that inclusion really effective. So what concerned me, and the reason why I ended up writing with Gary Hornby, was that we had these aspirations for effective inclusive education, and actually it wasn't materializing effectively. We, on the ground, we had serious problems. And whilst the legislation was helpful to an extent, and it did mean that we had more training for teachers, and we had more resources in place than previously, the difficulties were becoming more and more exposed. And part of that was also because of the awareness of parents of their rights. Now, at the same time as we had legislation for schools to know what they should be doing, the parents also knew what to expect. And that meant there was a higher and higher expectation of the way in which children would be supported in mainstream schools. And I think in part that has accounted for classes feeling overwhelmed with demands for those needs to be met. And sadly, at the moment, we've got a situation where we've got very skilled teachers. And, I would say that we are fortunate in that there's some very good CPD that has continual professional development that has helped a lot of teachers upskill and understand a lot about different needs, but they can't be seen through. They can't be seen to be implemented effectively, and so we've got quite an adversarial relationship now that has been developing between parents and senior leadership teams and special educational needs coordinators. So the system is kind of there and ready and in place to implement inclusion, but the resources are lacking. And because, well, I mean, I think it's probably, I don't want to go on too much because I know, Danny, you're going to explore it more about what those impediments are, what the difficulties are. So I won't go into too much detail about that. But one thing that we all have in common, or most countries seem to have in common, is the UNCRPD treaty that we've all signed. And then the expectations are, once it's been ratified by each country, to put that in place and to implement it. And I think one of our problems is that we have a system of academy trusts that now works more autonomously than in previous days when schools were associated and governed by and large by local authorities. And it has meant that we've got some opportunity for those schools to differentiate to a certain extent. So we've got, in some areas, a certain, perhaps what I would say covert differentiation between, or distinguishing between, those children who their schools are accepting and those who are not being accepted. And it's a bit complicated for me to explain it in one go, and I don't think you want me to, but there is a problem now that we have, that where the schools are very well resourced, and that tends to be in big towns like London, big city areas where it's densely populated, where you can share resources and where they've been effectively funded. Schools tend to have a better time. They seem to be a bit more confident in how they're able to include a wider range of children. We still have, and then comparing that within the provinces, a lot of provincial towns, particularly seaside towns are really suffering from lack of resources and lack of staff to come into schools to meet the needs in the way that everybody expects them to. We still have special schools. And one of the things I would say about the UNCRPD is that England was one of the countries to introduce a proviso not to to say that that inclusion could be seen as including children within the school system rather than strictly speaking within the classroom. So this was kind of a get out, if you like, of going down the route of full inclusion. The other proviso that it put forward was that it should be able to take children into other areas outside the local community in order for them to go to a special school that was not within their community. So, you know, what I'm saying, I think, is the legislation is there, the will is there, there's an awful lot of practical, pragmatic problems that have made this a very difficult, complex issue for us. Yeah, I want to give, I think that's enough for now. I could go on for a long time.
So it seems like across the board in all of our contexts, the will and the intention is there. The question is, where is the policy? Where is the practice? Where's the knowledge? And where is the enactment? And it sounds like everyone is in different transitional phases. And we could very easily summarize it as complex and nuanced across these different contexts that we're looking at. Dake, can you go ahead and switch me to our next question? All right, so you guys have gotten into this a good bit already, but if you could summarize in 2 to 3 sentences, what is the status of inclusive education in your context? What would you say it is? Zun, do you want to get us started on this one? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry.
No worries.
Sorry. So like in brief, like so maybe into maybe 1 or 2 sentences about inclusive education. Of course, like inclusive education is like ensuring like all children have their quality education regardless of their ability, right? And also maybe race, sorry, gender, like language or whatever, like abilities or disability. So, and also different background, like different socioeconomic background, different political background, whatever or wherever they are from. So we are trying to give the quality education in a common sense. So like actually like we are talking about the inclusive education. I'm gonna place like the giving the quality education together, all together, maybe like in the same place of schooling. So that is the very like difficult part of the, I think maybe implementation process, like how can we make it all together? And also it will be a big burden for the teacher. Yeah, obviously for sure. How can we make it well with those different aspects of the student and with different like needs of the, how they can fulfill the different needs of the students. So this is like all about the overview of the inclusive education. Yeah.
So it sounds like Myanmar is very much so trying to approach things aligned with Agenda 2030, really thinking about inclusion for all going on disability, but also really centralizing disability because that tends to be the area that we default to when talking about inclusion. Awesome. Morai, how about in Lesotho? What's the current status of inclusion?
Thank you. In Lesotho, right now, we, like I said when I started, we are trying, we have the special schools, like in the primary school level. But then when the students go to high school level, then they go to an inclusive school. So specifically, I will make an example of deaf students. So they go to one school. We have one inclusive school in Lesotho for the deaf students. So we have only 2 deaf schools in the whole country. So all of them go to one school. So when they get to that school, they are taught in the same classrooms with other students, not only the hearing students, but also other students with disabilities. So when they get to the schools, but obviously because there's still some challenges there, but a lot of research in Lesotho shows that it's not really the status of inclusive education the way we would want it to work currently, or the way maybe teachers are expected to teach students is not in the form of inclusive education, but in the form of integration, if we may say it like that, because last year I was doing research in one of those schools, or one of that school that is said to be including deaf students. But then when I arrived in the classrooms, I realized that they are in the same school, but in the classrooms, they are separated in one corner in the same classroom. So the other students are also on the other side of the classroom. So, but then when we were making like some of the discussions, it was also the challenge of being trained, because teachers also have like the sign language interpreters. So they say it's very challenging also to put them together with other students in the same school, in the same classroom, and then try to discuss. So they were showing that to be there saying, okay, let me teach them and then I sign is kind of probably challenging, because even these students who are hearing or other disabilities, they don't speak sign language. So that's what we're saying. So, but generally in the whole context of inclusive education in Lesotho also, we have a research in Lesotho also showing that even in higher education, it is very challenging to accept students who may pass, not only those who are there, but those who go to higher institutions. There are no resources ready. There are no teachers that are ready. And sometimes even when our students pass, like in the last 2 weeks ago, I had a colleague who called me and said one of our students wanted to enroll in the higher institution, but then he didn't pass English. And then they say it's very hard for him to be enrolled in this higher institution, because even right now we can't communicate with him. So it means even the higher institutions are not ready. Like even if the students are just going to go there to inquire about the admissions, they are like, no, we can't speak, or we don't understand what they're saying. So it's a lot of challenging things, even though we are really pushing forward to try to see how the students can be included in all aspects of the level of their education, in Lesotho. So that's it.
So it sounds like there's still a lot of focus on accessing the inclusive spaces in Lesotho, needing to go beyond that. But a lot of what the work is on right now is getting students into the building and then continuing on that progression moving forward. Philippa, how about from England?
Yeah, I mean, the picture is very mixed depending on the resources in the schools, to be honest with you. By and large, an awful lot of schools rely still quite heavily on the idea of removing children from classes to give them support for a small amount of the day. I mean, it may only be 20 minutes, but in small, short interventions like that are quite common. Because of the lack of staff, often teaching assistants that are needed within the classroom for the whole class are not there for the majority of the day. But again, that will depend from one region to another. We've got a number of interventions that are effective, that we think are good. We're looking at assessments too that are quite powerful in terms of assessing a large number of children in one go, which is useful, particularly in the early years. And I think that that is a good springboard for a lot of schools to at least be able to identify the groupings for interventions. And we do have things like Read, Write, Ink. I don't know if you've come across this program, but that is a program that has really made a difference in terms of upskilling children who've got underlying reading difficulties, because it's very systematic, and it's one way of getting a number of children started with reading more effectively. So, you know, in that sense, there's some good things that are going on, but I think we have so many children who have not been assessed and are quite seriously affected, and that don't get the support still within the classroom. You know, this is a major problem. It's in part because we do value inclusion. Inclusion is a policy for most schools, well, for all schools. It's a key element of their policy. In fact, schools will say that they are inclusive, no matter how, no matter what your interpretation of inclusion is. And I mean, we have private schools in our country, and they are often you know, they have to compete to get into these schools, but nonetheless they will say they're very inclusive. So when you burrow down, you realize, well, they are inclusive because they include a lot of diverse people on many fronts, you know, and sexual orientation and racial background and ethnic background and religious background. All these are very inclusive things. And then they'll also say, well, if a child has dyslexia, they're also included. But there will still be an element of segregation when they make those choices about who actually it is admitted to those schools. And then the other thing is that we're beginning to realize that an awful lot of our behavioral problems in schools are connected with children whose learning difficulties have not actually been recognized. And sadly, some of those children end up with reactive behavior that then leads to exclusions. And then, you know, we're going in another route which we don't want to go in, but has become a sort of consequence of not being able to address those needs properly in the first place. So mixed, I'm afraid.
Thank you. I know the next question is the question that everyone has been trying to not answer along the way, so I am going to officially put it on the floor for your consideration. What are some of the current barriers to inclusive education in your context? Philippa, how about you go ahead and continue, because you were just starting to get into some of those and I could feel you trying to hold on for this question. Why don't you go ahead with England?
Yeah, I mean, I think the economic barrier is a big one. Local authorities have been very strapped for cash, particularly since the demands placed on them since COVID. But I have to say that prior to COVID, we did have a parliamentary review that was focused on all the other issues that were holding back good provision for SEND. And when I use this shorthand SEND, I hope you don't mind. It just means it covers everything, specific special educational needs and disabilities, and it's the shorthand we use in England. And the economic factor is a huge one, but it's not the only one. And I would say that, yes, we're always trying to get more funding so that we can resource schools with more teachers, well-trained teachers, but also and teaching assistants. But I also think that the focus is not quite right yet. We are not focusing enough on ensuring that assessment is done early enough, thoroughly enough, and then followed up. So it's the quality of special needs provision within mainstream that is lacking. And the problem is the default for teachers and parents is then, oh, well, they'll need to go to a special school. And we don't have enough special schools because a lot of them have been closed now. And we're actually trying to build up more special schools because the demand has so increased. So we've got into a bit of a struggle. It's a, you know, some people are calling it a catastrophe really in England at the moment, that we have so much demand. And I do recognize that throughout the world, in many different countries, the demand is huge and has increased over the last few years. And that's a subject in itself for study. But another factor I would say that is a key barrier is that we have a top-heavy administration dealing with assessments at the local education authority level. So our local authorities are spending a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of expertise on analysing whether a child does or doesn't have a special need that needs to be supported in a certain way. And it takes a huge amount of time. So invariably, the plans that the children are supposed to have, these are the legally protected documents that should safeguard their provision, often take far too long to be made available. And so the child, you know, a week is a long time for a child's development. And if it's taking a long time to get that provision through, it's an awful lot of time wasted, and that child can slip back in that time. But it's not just that. Even when the plans come through, we find that they're not properly resourced in many schools. But what we end up seeing is some schools doing extremely well and other neighbouring schools you know, not doing well at all. And so what used to be what we could see as a difference between the way our education system worked and maybe another education system in a developing country worked, now we feel the differences are within our own country. It's a question of seeing schools that are being very successful in certain parts of the country and not in others. And part of that is to do with where the local authority, where they're placed in terms of the support that they can provide. So yes, I mean, skill, you could say a lot of it is skills as well. I mean, I would like to see more skills and improved skills, but particularly for the teaching assistants. You know, every school now relies heavily on teaching assistants to support teachers if they're going to have a lot of diverse needs in the classroom. And sometimes we're talking about a disparity of 3 or 4 years within the same classroom in terms of academic achievement. And that's an awful lot. And that is a real challenge for a teacher to cope with on their own. So if there isn't another adult in the classroom who's sufficiently trained to be able to scaffold those children, then, you know, hard as she might try and as much as she may know about that child's disabilities, it's very difficult for her to implement what she knows to be needed.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to loosely assume that you've got some similar barriers in Lesotho and also some unique ones to your context. Can you go ahead and share some of the main barriers you're experiencing there?
Oh, yes. So yeah, you're right. We have like similar ones, and like mostly about assessment. Assessment is limited, or if there is any, because usually the assessment is done by us, teachers. So we don't like the early assessment of, my point was also going to talk about the collaboration also, which also leads to that assessment, because sometimes even when you go to the hospitals, the early interventions, when we try to find the resources like that for our students, it's very challenging to get them, because they will not have, they will say there are some things that they cannot use the machinery or whatever. So there are so many things that we do not have. So students, when they come to schools in Lesotho, especially to our special schools for the deaf, we have to assess them as teachers. And that is very challenging because our assessment skills, we have limited assessment skills. We are there because we are going to teach them, but when we are there, sometimes you find that at the beginning of the school year, the students are moving between classes because now we don't know, like, you don't know, this one maybe doesn't have, like, even the assessment for their educational level, it's very hard because some of them will come from the mainstream schools or the regular schools. And then when they come here, because they are hoped to get better education in special schools, so it will be hard to assess and say, or maybe they should be in this grade or they should be in that grade. Some of them may be hard of hearing, and then the teachers will be like, oh, maybe they don't belong here. They have to go straight to the inclusive school. So those are like some of the challenges that we have of assessment, and also talking also about the early intervention, because we have a lot of students that will come to the schools when they are 20. I used to teach one in the preschool, and then there will be 6 years or 5 years, but then some will come when they are 20, 25, or when they are already 30. So it's very challenging, because even when they are in the communities, it's challenging to see that, okay, this child may be deaf, or they have to go to school early, but because also there are only 2 schools for the deaf, and they are in the 2 districts also. So all the students in the other 5 districts of Lesotho, they have to go there to those schools. And if they go to the neighboring schools, the teachers there also, of course, are not provided, because those schools are not yet inclusive schools. So they'll be like, oh, there's a deaf school somewhere in another district. So those are some of the challenges that we have, that our students do not come to school early. And then when they get to schools late, then we're also faced with the challenge of where do they go? Because if he's 20 and he's going to start in the preschool, so what is going to happen along the way? Because usually when he's 17, he should be finishing high school. But for him, he's just coming at 20 and then to start the preschool. So those are one of the challenges. Then the other challenge is also of the teachers. Currently, in Lesotho, the programs for special education, we have them, and we have them also training teachers in special education for different students with disabilities. And when they go to schools, right now the university is trying hard also to have the programs for deaf education, for students with visual impairments like that, to help them go to schools and teach the students in the specific areas of their education. So the other one also is also like what was that? I had some of them. Oh, also the other challenge is that when we have our students in inclusive schools, we also have teachers who have like the in-service and the pre-service training. Teachers are usually not trained in how to teach the students. And also when we get the training, like the support, the resources, so it's also challenging for some of the teachers to use them. But like Philippa mentioned earlier, when we talk about like some students, if we are able to assess the students, that is one of the things that I mentioned in my other book chapter. Like if we know, like you assess students, you know the type or probably the type of disabilities, or also how we can support them. But it's very challenging because even if they are deaf, they are different. They are different. So it's kind of hard to say we have only one thing or one strategy to support them or to help them succeed in school. So one of the things that I show in my book chapter is that if a student graduates in Lesotho, it's because they are, so sometimes like they are lip reading there, and teachers are like, when students are completely deaf in Lesotho, they don't even go anywhere in primary over primary. So those are the challenges that we know we want to address in Lesotho right now, also with the inclusive education, to make sure that we get assessments earlier, we get early intervention earlier to our students, so that they proceed and succeed in school. Thank you.
Before we jump to Myanmar, Philippa has been inspired to share some additional things from England. So I'm going to pop that over to Philippa and
Sorry.
we'll travel over to Myanmar
I,
afterwards. Go ahead, Philippa.
to be honest, I think my head's exploding. To be um, yeah, well, one of the big things for us, and we noticed it especially after the lockdowns from COVID. But I think, to be honest, it was just opening up a wound, and that was the speech and language development of young children coming into schools was very weak, and I've since seen some studies looking at the impact of the use of social media and screens and tablets for young children, and it really is quite worrying the lack of the the lack of opportunity that means the child has to be exposed to regular interaction, conversation with other people, other children and adults, and it's become a default mechanism for the child to go to be entertained, and it means that then they're not listening to processing language and also not developing their own language skills in the way that they normally would. And we are very, very worried about that. So the level of development that we're seeing coming into schools is very concerning, and it means that we're starting off from a very different base, and it's quite difficult then to sort out, well, who genuinely has a special educational need that needs supporting and who is just behind developmentally because of the lack of life experience and opportunity to talk. That was one thing I wanted to say. And then the other thing was that when we have so many different difficulties and such a range of degree of difficulties, that can end up with a classroom that has the group composition can be really so varied and so challenging in different ways. So, it's so much easier to absorb and include a child if there's only, say, one of them with that difficulty, or there are if there's one child with ADHD and one child with autism and one child with dyslexia, you might be able to cope with that. But if you've got 6 children with ADHD and a couple more with on the autistic spectrum, and then another with, say, some speech and language learning difficulties as well, and some others that have are struggling to, moderate learning difficulties. So they've got cognitive impairments. Maybe there's also a child with hearing difficulties or visual impairment. You could go on and have such a vast range of impairments within one classroom, that the challenges facing one individual teacher can be very varied and are not sufficiently supported. And yet, generally speaking, the leader, the head teacher or the leader of the trust of schools might say, well, there is one teaching assistant for your class, and that's it, and won't look necessarily at the impact of that group composition, which I think is so important. Sorry, that's what I wanted to say, Danny, for the moment.
Thank you so much. We're starting to hear training and early intervention be a big component of it. And then, like you said, that question of, is it development due to the pandemic and coups and all the things going on, or is it truly a disability? I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Zun Wai to share any additional barriers that you might have in your context.
Yeah, we also have the similar wing, like not the, how can I say, like equal thing, like the similar thing, like the laws and policy. So we don't have that much like effective legislation for them. So for example, like I'm here in Japan, and sometimes like we used to like compare some situation, even though, yeah, of course, we developing country and like developed country, they have like totally different background, right? I know that, but sometimes I feel like it's very difficult to label them. Like labeling me, like actually like now I'm trying to focus on students with intellectual disability, but we don't have like any standardized test, like to explore the diagnosis of like the their types of disability or even the severity of their disability. So how, like sometimes, like some, what I noticed is like we have like, okay, like when we are, before we are moving to the inclusive education, like I'm gonna like bring some example about the special needs education. So what I'm understand is like inclusive education is like mean the way that we are trying to, how can I say, promote, and we are trying to give like from the essence, from the sense of um, disability, or maybe for the children with special needs. So we are trying to give them more quality and also more inclusive like environment for them. So basically at the beginning, like it's a kind of like the chronological changes, like revolution from the segregation, like integration or inclusion, something like this. So basically in some country, they have fully access of the special education, like special needs education or special education, whatever, in going to their context. So my point is like they have fully access and they have the quality special education. But in like changing context, no, even though they have the good quality special education, they need to be inclusive. They need to, like, how can I say, communicate with the other, not within their community. They have to go out and communicate. So this is the essence, like the general essence about the inclusive education. So my point in, even in my country, so in my first book chapter, like collaborating with you guys, those like, I just like mentioned something about the collaboration that they made in the special education and also like the inclusive education. Some like small, but like some collaboration what they made. So my point is, even in my country, the special needs education, they don't have fully accept because of these. We have like a loops legislation, like we don't have any system to label them. And also we don't have any standardized test. Some public special school and also even private one, they are trying to test, like, how can I say, they are maybe like, they have like some school, they have collaboration with NGO and INGO. They have some like tests, not the standardized tests. Like they have some type like age appropriate tests to how can I say, to explore the diagnosis of their disability or something. So it's mean like we don't have the standardized one. And also like sometimes they help with the like some clinical judgment with their combined with their some tests from their school and also some clinical judgment, and they judge, okay, this kids have this disability, and also the level is, so it's mean there is no standardized test. And also like it's very difficult to label their types of disability and also the severity. And when we are trying to research more about the student with special needs in general education school, so what I noticed is like they don't have much data. Actually, they don't have like okay, there is a student with disability. They, even the teacher, they don't even know, but they are trying their best to include them in their classroom. But they don't even know about their types of disability and also the severity or something like this. So it's very, very difficult to like kind of pleasing the children and pleasing the parents and also the child like to learn. Actually, like even like something is very difficult to, how could I say, like make the effective implementation of inclusive education in this situation. So the first one is like even in 2014, so this is the first education law, they mentioned about the including all children in like actually like open. Before that, some general school principal, they will say no to those kids. No, they are not our school. Maybe like we cannot give the best. Maybe the reason is so sweet and so soft, like we cannot give the best quality services to you. So maybe your child are not like suitable for our school like this. And also they will say no, like politely to the parents. And also, and especially the parent and the kids with the like, well, like how can I say, like the rich background, they are okay. They can go to the private school. But who has like a low social status, and also like we have like some like maybe poor family, they cannot go. Even like when you check the list of the special school in my country, even public school, we have only 8 in the whole country, and also even in the big city. So apart from that, some private schools are very expensive. So my point is, some family from the rural area and also with low socioeconomic status, so this general school is the only choice for them. There is no choice. And also we don't have, I mean, like any system like of like forcing, not forcing, I shouldn't say forcing, like how can I say, like a systematic like a localized authority to go to put those kids should go to these schools or that school, something like that. No, we don't have that system. So the point is, that's why most of the kids before 2014, but before they launched that, okay, all schools shouldn't say no to all types of students. So we are allowed to accept all students. So before that, they said no to them. And 2014, it's like a kind of not inclusive or special needs, something not clearly defined or something like this. Like, okay, we are accepting all types of students in our education system. That's all. And 2015, like they amended the law, and like they mentioned like something about the special education services, not special needs education. So we are trying to give those students in general school to give some services like according to their needs. That's what they said in their how can I say, paper. And also they mostly the researcher, like how can I say, point out that they didn't have the clear definition of the special needs education and inclusive education so far. So that's why like we need a strong laws and policy to make everything into practice, and also like strong legislation, something like this. So, and also like another very, very like, how can I say, crucial one for me is like the general understanding about the inclusive education, like among the most, like, how should I say, educational stakeholders, even the policymaker. So they don't know much about the inclusive education. It's like a kind of like, how can I say, like on paperwork. Maybe they size CRBD, and also like they are just like trying to communicate with some organization, but they have level of general understanding of what is exactly inclusive education. So this is also another issue. So and also like even related to this, we have like 3 main institutions, like we call a University of Education in Myanmar. We have 3, the main one. And also we don't have specialized subjects in special needs education or something about the inclusive education. So that is so strange. And also those special schools ran by the Ministry of Social Welfare, not under the Ministry of Education. And they don't have the strong linkage between those ministries. So there are so many, like, how can I say, the gap between these 2 ministries, and also the human resources. So when I was a junior high school teacher in maybe like at grade 6, I have a student like with autism. But at the time, I didn't know that he has autism. So, and also I was struggling to communicate with him. And also, I don't know how can I say, solve the classroom problem related to him or something like that. At the time, I feel like, why? I graduated from the University of Education, and also like I don't have enough knowledge and also like experience to be the inclusive teacher in reality. So that's why when I go back and maybe when I try to find the scholarship from abroad, I feel like, okay, that was my plan. I really would like to bring something, something related to inclusive education, or maybe actually special needs education. I don't have that much expectation because my background is not special needs education. So actually, basically I really would like to bring something back about the maybe to be like a small pieces of part of the inclusive education. Okay. And
So I
also
just
like,
wanted, I'm so sorry.
yes,
I want to
okay.
make sure one of the things that we try to do at all these events is be able to break out into groups so that people can interact with each one of our speakers. And so what we're going to do is I have 3 groups and one of the speakers is in each group. And then Daki, Danny, and I are also in that group so that we can hear from everyone who joined us today. We will have, it was going to be 9:22, but we're gonna extend it to 9:25, so it's only about 8 minutes in the groups. Then we'll come back out. We'll share any big things that happen, and then kind of finish the event for today. So I'm gonna move us into groups, and then I know that we'll get into even better conversations. So I will do that right now. But thank you so much for coming and speaking. I know that our audience tends to want to hear from all of you and get a chance to speak. So I will open those breakout rooms now. I know that that was so quick. So, yes, but it is so nice to be able to get into a smaller space and just meet everyone who's in the room and our speakers and everything else. So did Daki, did your group want to share out on what you were able to maybe touch on?
Oh, yes. We have 3 group members. Virginia Simons, who is from Guatemala. She just one of the leaders of the gifted program, which is also part of special education at the other end of the curve. And also we have Philippa from England, one of our panelists. We shared about the gifted program in different countries. It was exciting that Virginia shared that they are launching some gifted programs, so students who are with giftedness and also with special education needs like Asperger's get treated. They have an individualized educational plan. So that's really exciting. And also our panelist, Philippa, just shared about the gifted education program in England. And unfortunately, we hope like in the future, we can have more conversations about gifted education, also special education in different countries. That's a very interesting area to talk about.
Thank you so much. Danny, did you want to share about your group?
Absolutely. We were working with Zun Wai Oo out of Myanmar, and we talked a little bit about how one of the unintended consequences, both positive and negative, of COVID across the board is parental involvement, where a lot of times COVID forced that parental involvement a lot more than what we may have seen in other spaces. And in particular, Laura was sharing that a lot of parents who were apprehensive to pick up AAC for their students and to bring that continuum across the board, for lack of better words, didn't have a choice, and worked to figure that out. And then in Myanmar, we were talking about how there's some coaching that goes directed towards the parents when it comes to autism and intellectual disabilities and how some of that plays out in that space.
Wonderful. And I'll just share out for our group. We were able to connect and we talked about the different labels or categories of special education. Both Dr. Dace and I are here in California, and we were in the room with Morai. And so we talked about the categories, and then we also talked about some of the challenges of here in California, oftentimes we see the special educators wanting to keep their students in their classroom and not have them going out, and then vice versa, the special education teachers saying, oh, they need more support than we can provide. And, that idea of not being able to, or concerns about not being able to give the kind of support that a student would need. So I know that It's a very quick recap. But we did want to, thank everyone for being here and let you know that we will be summarizing this, and this will be going on YouTube as one of our virtual events and become an info brief. We also are really excited to have more opportunities for getting involved in DISES. If you are interested in joining one of our committees, on April 27th, I think it is. It's a Saturday. We're going to be having a committee meeting. So that's a great way to get involved and meet other people from around the world and think about ways that we can make an impact. And you can just email me and I will give you that link to our meeting then. And we also have some sip and chats coming up and our big conference in Panama. If Laura, or I think it was Laura, you're in Guatemala. If you want to jump over to Panama, then you can join us there. And we'll be continuing to have different events throughout the year. So on behalf of DISES, I just want to thank you so much for being here and look forward to seeing you at our future events. Did my teammates want to say any last things before we log off?
Dake, if you will just put up that very last slide, there is a QR code with a post-session survey that anyone who would love to give us feedback can provide information on that helps guides us in topics and how we structure these sessions. It should be
this one?
yes, that is the one.
Okay.